All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Quinn Henderson, and I'm an education lead at Future Design School. That's the organization who's hosting today's webinar. Future Design School works with educational institutions around the world in K-12 and higher education to design exceptional, personalized learning experiences for students. We do this through strategic work with leadership, through specialized training and certification programs for faculty, and through our curriculum as well as our student programs. We are passionate about always designing for the future and investigating how best to prepare students for a rapidly changing world. So before we get started, we want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. And we ask that you remain on audio and video mute throughout the webinar. And it might be helpful to set your video to gallery view so you can see Sarah and David throughout the session. And we'll be kicking the fireside chat in just a moment. Our guests will discuss a multitude of topics, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a link into the chat right now so you can submit your questions throughout this session. And remember just to use that link and submit those questions. And all of your questions will be provided to the host, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can before the end of the session. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our host for today's webinar, Sarah Prevette. Sarah is the founder and CEO of Future Design School. She has built, scaled, and sold multiple technology companies, been a part of designing innovation ecosystems across the globe, and continues to invest in early stage startups. She is a sought-after advisor to some of the world's top brands and government leaders, and she sits on the board of renowned innovation hubs like Communitech and Venture Lab. So thanks for hosting today, Sarah. It's all yours.
Thanks, Quinn. And thanks everyone for joining us. Super excited about the conversation today. I think we can all agree that there's many forces accelerating the rate of change in society. And the future of work is really being reshaped across every single industry. And I'm really excited to talk today about how that is actually impacting not just the future of work, but also the future of education, and higher education being the specific focus. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my illustrious guest today, someone I'm very privileged to call a friend, Mr. David Agnew. So many of you will probably know David as the esteemed president of Seneca College, but many of you may not know his ridiculously fancy background. I've known David for a long time, and even I continue to be shocked about the fact that he consorts with the likes of me. He has not only been a journalist, but also been head of the public service in Ontario, CEO of UNICEF, and he's been on the board of pretty much everything, including banks, hospitals, government advisory groups, and innovation centers. I'm not the only one who thinks he's a bit of an overachiever. The Queen of England actually recognized his incredible lifetime of service with a Diamond Jubilee Medal. No big deal. He has a unique vantage point that spans many industries, and his perception into the changing world is really truly expansive and global. He is absolutely, without a doubt, one of my favorite people to discuss education with, and I couldn't be more thrilled to subject him to my grilling here today. David, thanks for being here.
Well, after that introduction, I'm tempted to claim audio problems. You've built me up rather well, but anyway, it's a privilege to be here. And of course, who better to talk about the future of work than someone who clearly couldn't, by that resume, keep a job. So I'm your expert for today. But no, it's a great privilege to be here, and it's great to see you again, even virtually, as we all do these days. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation. You're in a unique position given your work with school boards, with companies, with educators of what the K-20 system, as we call it. And then, of course, we really shouldn't be putting limits on it. We should be talking about a lifelong learning system, because that's certainly what we're in now.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we can dig into some of that today, because I do think that the way that the world is shifting is even changing. We've been talking about lifelong learners for a long time, but what does that actually mean in this sort of brave new world? I think we'd be remiss not to start with the major topic dominating all of our lives, and the fact that we have to do this virtually. You've been amidst this crisis as a leader of a very large organization, and well, lots of schools are actually getting ready for a brief hiatus, and some people are getting ready for vacation and able to catch their breath. You don't. You don't get a moment. There really is no rest for the wicked here. You're amidst a summer term. And I'm sure that there's lots of folks here who would love to understand exactly how COVID-19 has actually impacted Seneca College and what you've had to do to pivot, and what some of the key learning has been so far.
Yeah, I mean, like the rest of the world, mid-March, I mean, it's almost amazing to think back that we said, well, we'll shut for a week, we'll retool, then 2 weeks after that we'll reopen. I mean, what were we thinking? But there we were, along with we had lots of company, but it wasn't extraordinary. I mean, in the space of a week, every single program and all of our services, which are often overlooked, but all of our services that support the students, support the faculty, support our employees in general, also all went virtual, and it was pretty extraordinary. I mean, we had two advantages in doing so. One is that we'd had a pretty sustained investment in our digital infrastructure, and in fact, we have a digital strategy that we, like everything else, suddenly hit fast forward on. But we had that very important infrastructure, including at the end of the day, 1,200 loaner laptops for students who didn't have the technology. Because of course, one of the things that happens when you close a campus with your computing commons and your free Wi-Fi is that suddenly students who are relying on that, and some employees who are relying on that, were at sea. But we also had a very strong, and I give them huge credit, teaching and learning group that worked with the faculty, obviously on sort of an emergency basis, to pivot to that virtual world, that online world, the remote delivery. So it's been since mid-March, essentially only a handful of people on campus. Construction continues, but we're not doing anything either from a service or an academic point of view on campus. You mentioned our summer term. We have, we're a full 3-semester school, so we have actually about 13,000 students studying with us in this summer. So it's completely online, and I guess I mean, this is huge credit to the faculty and the staff to be able to do that and to sustain that. It's one thing to do it and then think, okay, in 2 weeks we'll be back to normal, but to sustain it. And now, of course, and we can talk about the fall, but the key learning for me was never underestimate the creativity and the commitment of the people who really, I mean, are the front line of these organizations. They put their heart and soul into it, all because of the students, and it was remarkably smooth under the circumstance. Not without bumps, of course, remarkably smooth. But the other learning was, and I think particularly of a lot of the services that we offer, in the old days, it was, well, you have to be here. You have to be at your desk, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And then suddenly it was, you cannot be at your desk, get home. But we still want you to do your work. Well, okay. So all of a sudden we discovered that a whole bunch of things that we did not think could ever be online, counters that we thought you had to have because someone had to come and get a service, all of a sudden you could do it a different way. And that was, some of these things will be with us for some time.
That's a positive piece, right? Is that acceleration of innovation and the acceleration of digitization, right? In that aspect. And I do think it's interesting, because so many leaders, and I know that you know them as well, talk about this, the management, and they're concerned in this moment. How do I oversee people? How do I know what they're doing? And to me, that's a really puzzling question. Why do you need to see the input, right? How are you not just managing the output and setting expectations and hiring the best people? And I think, as things have transitioned online, it's interesting because it's actually also furthered management in terms of really thinking about it as, how do I empower my people to do their best work wherever they may be, and whatever that may look like. And I think that's a really positive outcome also.
Oh, no, absolutely no question. And I mean, I will fully confess that I was amongst those who were, a little bit skeptical about the whole work from home thing. And look, I mean, we also have to acknowledge it's not for everybody in every circumstance, and neither is learning online, in every circumstance. So we have to be right up front with that. But we have converted a lot of people. And I mean, all of us who are in big urban centers understand that if you can relieve people of long commutes, in some cases expensive, transit or 407 charges and gas and all that kind of stuff, and yet still get use the boss word, productivity out of people. Well, we got to think more creatively about this, and it becomes, and I know we're here to talk about education, but we're also talking about the future of work. It becomes an employee retention and attraction issue as well. Are you going to let me work 3 days a week at home? I'll put up with the big commute from my place up in nice rural Ontario on a couple of days, but I can't do it 5 days. I can't do it 5 days.
Well, I think it's shifted expectations. It's shifted expectations inside of education, but it has also shifted expectations inside of work. And you're right. If we're competing for talent, and some of the big companies like Shopify and others have actually announced that they're going fully remote. So, and they're letting people, it's work from anywhere, live from anywhere, as long as you can still collaborate with your teams and get your work done effectively. That's really, now we're all competing for the same talent. And so we have to be able to provide that flexibility, right?
Absolutely. And this thing is going to be in 3 stages, right? We went the complete online, virtual, stay at home, don't go out. Now we're in probably the most challenging phase, which is the comeback to campus, office, whatever. But then there's, I think where we need to put a lot of our energy is to, okay, but what's the new? And I mean, we've been very deliberate about that at Seneca. We're talking about a renewed Seneca. There isn't, we're not going to return to the old Seneca. And I think, speaking of Shopify, I mean, there's companies have already been out there saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We're taking a slightly more deliberative approach, but we do have a project underway, which is saying, okay, so, what we can step back now. We didn't ask for this, but we do have an opportunity to step back and say, okay, what should we continue to do in exactly the same way? What should we do slightly differently, or what should we stop doing altogether? So in our very hastily revised business plan for this fiscal year, after the first one, I called it a work of fiction in retrospect. We said there are 3 key questions that we should ask about any activity. May we resume it? In other words, is it allowed? I mean, we're still not allowed to be fully on campus, for instance. Can we fiscally, is it responsible, given that we're all going to take a bit of a hit as a lot of, huge parts of the economy have? But then the third question is, in a way, the most important one, which is, should we? should we, or is there a different way of doing it? Or is it, now that we're looking at this, after a period of 53 years of existence, is this something that we still, is it core to our mission? Is it something that's really enhancing the student experience or the graduate experience or the employee experience? So it is an interesting opportunity, and that's sometimes hard when you're at the eye of the hurricane. But I think it's a necessary and actually a good thing to do.
Well, I'm sure I'd also be remiss by not asking this question before we start digging in further into the future of work, but what can students and faculty expect in September?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're in pretty broad company here. It'll be mixed, but the kind of the rule of thumb is what can stay online will stay online. But of course, given the nature of our kind of polytechnic brand of education, we do need students in, and I'll use the generic term lab, but a lab is possibly a studio, it's possibly an airplane, it's possibly a dive tank, a practice lab for nurses. So, but we do need time in the labs. And so we will be bringing a much reduced number of students back on campus is the plan. We're actually running a pilot, what's called a pilot. I really say it's kind of like a phase 1 of that this summer in the entire post-secondary system in Ontario, where in the first instance, we're looking at finishing off the students who delightfully we call stranded, but the ones who were supposed to graduate in April but couldn't because of the immediate shutdown. And in some cases, that's literally hours, just a handful of hours that they need to do something. But they have to do it back on campus. So we're working very carefully with obviously the public health authorities have given us the green light to do that with appropriate safety measures. And so that'll be this summer, but then that's a prelude to a larger number. But and we're, of course, as someone joked, we've all become infectious disease experts in the last 3 months or so. But everything you read says physical distancing is still going to be necessary. We've all heard about this, the second wave. So the object of the exercise is to keep as many people off of campus as possible to lower that risk. So if you don't need to be here at Seneca, frankly, we don't want you here. And so we won't be, massively opening our study spaces and our libraries and so on. And of course, it's worth remembering, again, all of our services now are offered online. Right. It's a very high percentage of our collection these days, and the library, of course, is digital, so is available online. We've got an amazing virtualization of our software for our students, so they can do an awful lot of stuff from remotely, from home, and so on. So it'll be a sort of we're calling it hybrid, which is now become a flexible word, but it's kind of a hybrid looking fall.
Right. Well, it is interesting that it happened at this moment in time, right? If you think about this crisis happening even 10 years ago, with the bandwidths for video and things like that, I mean, we would have actually really struggled to be able to have that continuity of learning, right? So it's really actually very helpful that it happened in a moment where the technology can aid us to do that and do that digitization. So I'm going to come back to the experiential learning piece in a bit, because I think that's a really important point to sort of drill in on. But I was going through your strategic plan, the one that was pre-COVID. And, what I really appreciated about the plan was this, the establishment of these essential, I think you call them core literacies.
Core literacies,
and what you've done is establish, here are the core pieces that we think every student, every graduate needs. And then it's been embedded across the entire curriculum of every program. Can you talk a little bit about those and what the impetus was behind that?
Sure. They came out of a lot of reflection about how we can best prepare our students for the world of work, whatever their career, whatever their profession, whatever their intended job was. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the part, that's what we're all about, right? We take a very practical view of what our mission is to get people ready for great careers. We know, and we all know that employers are looking for much more than simply the technical skills or their professional accreditation. They're looking at the person. They're looking at the whole person. And we have a set of what are called essential employability skills that are meant to be driven through all of our programs. That's from the ministry. But we built on that and expanded to this broader list of what we're calling the core literacies, things like digital literacy, information literacy, intercultural literacy. I mean, it really, taken together, they complement that, what I call the four biggies that we always talk about: the critical thinking, the problem solving, the communications, the collaboration. I mean, I tell students or graduates from the convocation stage, your skills will get you the interview, but those are the things that are going to get you the job. Totally. That's what they're looking for more. They're looking for and we, as employers, we are too, right? I mean, that's, you look at, I sometimes say, I can tell the way, even sometimes the way people come across the convocation stage, the level of sort of confidence and I'm going to take on the world. You just know those people are going to walk into that interview room and really own it, which is terrific. So that's really, so we've taken each of our programs, mapped those core literacies, and it really is trying to reflect what we hear back from the employer community about what they're looking for, and it's been a very interesting exercise.
Well, when you think about those core competencies and when students are graduating, are they, and through their programs, are they reflecting on those competencies? Like, are they actually, or like, how am I demonstrating that to an employer?
Well, I mean, ideally, absolutely, you are. I mean, you're doing it in partly the confidence that you have in taking on the role, in the kind of what I would call almost the curiosity you have for the job and what's after the job, what's after this particular job. Because of course, what we're also trying to instill in people, if it's not already innate, is that that sense of, and we can talk about it, that this is not going to last forever, and I'm going to evolve because the world's evolving. In fact, I hope I can evolve as fast as the world is evolving, because I actually just need to stay on the crest of that wave. I don't want to be behind it. And so, those are the kinds of things that again, when we're looking at the learning outcomes of a particular course, and of course the program as a whole, we're looking for that to be reflected throughout in its entirety, and in lots of ways. I remember when I got here, there was a big project called English Across the Curriculum, and it was meant very much to say this, you know, don't box, you don't have a course saying core literacy, right? You don't have and as much as you want, you know, a very strong communications course, you also have to look at the entirety of the program to make sure that you're seeing that throughout the program.
That's so when, you know, we talk to different companies as well, I mean, they're saying the same thing, right? Is we need to see a new type of graduate. We need to see people who are going to be resourceful, and how are they going to think out of the box, and how are they going to be able to essentially walk in the door and immediately add value. And there's those industry specific skills, but then there are those sort of critical competencies. And, you know, what I think is interesting is they're looking at those competencies, but they're also looking at those role specific skills, and you're trying to do both of those. And they also know that one of the things that we hear from students is this frustration saying, you know, employers want me to demonstrate experience in order to get entry-level jobs. And they're thinking like, so how am I supposed to get the experience? And I know you've been really proactive about building work integrated learning. Can you talk a little bit about the impetus behind that, and what the feedback has been so far from potential employers?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're absolutely right. I mean, it's very frustrating. We've all been there. We all started our careers at some point where someone, you know, you got everything I need except I need 10 years experience. Well, unless I start somewhere, you know. So, and that's the one thing that we can't give someone 10 years experience, but we can through work integrated learning, give them exposure to their workplace, to their future workplace, to their, you know, whatever that is. Again, across our, you know, huge range of programs, it varies tremendously, but that's an absolutely critical part of most of our programs, whether it's a co-op, an internship, a placement, an externship. We use applied research as a sort of a experiential learning experience for our students as well. Something where, again, and you've seen this as an entrepreneur, if you're working with you know, a startup or an entrepreneurial company, I mean, that entrepreneur has their heart and soul on. There's nothing more real than trying to prove that idea is actually a marketable product or service or whatever it is. So all those are very important. And I mean, the employers for the most part are you know, wonderfully cooperative. My plea to government is to continue to think about ways to attract more businesses to that world. I mean, I give, you know, the big employers, you know, the banks are terrific, you know, for instance, but of course they're also the banks. I mean, they've got, you know, resources beyond most companies. So it's harder to crack in, frankly, to the medium and of course the small businesses, because they, you know, they don't have perhaps as sophisticated an HR system, and they, you know, they're running at, you know, at full speed just to keep their heads above water. So that's a challenge, but it's absolutely marvelous. And, you know, an awful lot of those experiences turn into a full-time employment or a job afterwards, or and, you know, as I sometimes joke, it's a bit of try before you buy, right? I mean, on both sides, because of course, you know, it's not to say the student is in love with the place or that kind of work. Even it can be actually a career altering or a directional change, because you've actually seen what it's like in the workplace. And of course, in some fields where you've got great options. I mean, I'm thinking, for instance, of nursing, where there's lots and lots of different kinds of nursing, you know, from public health to right into the OR and so on and so forth. It also can help sort out your career direction. So it's really a terrific opportunity. And I know the K-12 system is working hard to broaden those kinds of experiences open. And frankly, you know, the other guys across the street, the universities are doing it too. Because again, and that's responding very much to the employer community.
Well, for sure. And I think that it's, you know, when you're thinking about these integrated opportunities, it seems a little late in post-secondary to be like exploring career options, right? I mean, I'm a huge advocate for letting kids try on careers, you know, as young as elementary school. And I think one of the things that, you know, we all need to remember, and something that, to your point, government needs to sort of address, I think, is that kids are being asked now at a very early age to determine what they want to invest in for their career. And they only know what they've been exposed to. And typically you're only exposed to what your family does or what your neighbors do. And so you are really limited in sort of knowing what you don't know. And I think that, you know, thinking about how do we really infuse more career exploration into the K-12 curriculum is a really important piece.
Yeah,
And
I think we put a lot of almost unfair pressure on young people to make those choices, and they start to narrow their options rather early. I mean, it is interesting, and I think it's reflective of some of that. I mean, now about 60% of our students are actually not coming to us from high school. They're coming to us from work. They're coming to us from some time at another post-secondary institution. We have, of course, a lot of students coming for our graduate certificates from universities and so on. And I think that's reflective of people getting out there and saying, maybe this isn't what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go back and do some, upskilling, reskilling, completely different skilling, whatever it is, to look for another opportunity. And that's a hard nut to crack, because I know, people get, they get asked very early, so what do you want to be?
totally. Yeah. And it should, and you know what, I think, you and I both are great demonstrations of this, that career paths aren't usually linear and you never really know the opportunities that are going to come up, right? And being able to grab those opportunities and continue to be a lifelong learner and develop the skills that you need to be able to sort of chase what you're naturally passionate about is amazing. But something you said that is triggering for me is the fact that 60% are not coming out of K-12. So, and I've seen countless students go to university, amass a wild amount of debt getting an undergraduate degree, and then tell us that they need to go to college to get career ready. And I find it flabbergasting, because I keep going, well, skip the $80,000 debt piece, go to college and get a job and then find the opportunities through that. Like, what does that say about society, that we're putting pressure on kids to get an undergraduate degree, which is maybe not serving them in any way or helping them even gain the exposure or the skills, and then they feel they have to go do another? Like, we almost have a two-tiered higher ed system here that everyone needs to participate in.
Yeah, I mean, you step back from it and you, I mean, part of it is we've got a bit of a balkanized system, as small as we are, relatively speaking. I mean, you go to the States, there's this massive range of small, private, public, semi-private, and good, bad, and indifferent. I mean, we're blessed in Canada, certainly in Ontario, having a very high quality public education system, and it virtually, I mean, the amount of private education is pretty small. Mm-hmm. But even at that, we're not necessarily always that coordinated in offering the students. So, you hear a lot about, and we can get into the whole credential piece, but the whole, I mean, no credential should be a dead end. Everything should be, stackable in as we're learning. As we move forward to this whole world of micro-credentials, it's, that's going to be even more important, that people don't find themselves with these, stranded pieces of paper that don't actually mean anything to anybody else. We have to make sure that there's value and credibility to those things. But they also lead to someplace, and people don't feel they have to make choices that they're almost imposed upon them about the kind of education they'll pursue, knowing that they can always come back and do more, right? They can always come back and explore another area. And I mean, people are finding it out too late, as you say. They've already made the big investment, and it's too bad.
Well, is that your vision for micro-credentials? And I know you and I have argued about this for years, about the fact that micro-credentials already exist. We already do them. And so, but there has been a lot of hype and a lot of talk about it in K-12, in corporate, and in higher ed. And so when you think about micro-credentials and you think about the ways you see the future of work unfolding and this necessary component that people are going to have to continue to upskill, what is your big vision, and what's the next step that Seneca needs to take to do that?
Yeah, I'll defend my view, first of all, that they've existed forever. It's funny, actually, it'll be 11 years in July that I've been here, and one of my first encounters when I got here was an envelope from one of the students that was studying a program in the Philippines, and in those days we hadn't yet sunset the written part of it. So it actually, we're mailing stuff off and mailing stuff back. Anyway, we're out of that business now. But we've been, I mean, speaking of online, we've been doing distance learning. We've been doing, local college certificates, which is basically bundled courses and a record of achievement and all that kind of stuff. So that's my now you got the $25 word in there, micro-credential, but those never really, of course, officially, they don't fit on the credential framework, micro-credentials. And any little shopping mall pop-up can offer a micro-credential. There's no patent on the word. Whereas if you've got a Ontario degree, you've got a diploma, you've got a PhD, and so on and so forth. There's a whole system behind it. So that's part of the discussion, which is really how does it fit into that? And if you can go to Harvard and get a mini MBA, where does that mini graduate degree fit in on our credential framework and so on and so forth? So that's part of the discussion. But absolutely, I mean, it's been the way it is, and it's going to continue to be the way of the future. That as the economy changes at the speed it does, that it will be necessary to be on a continuous learning journey for one's career and one's life. As you move from place to place, from track to track, you're going to need to have that kind of refresher, upskilling, reskilling, and so on and so forth. And micro-credentials are fit the bill because they're very elastic. It's a very elastic category, which is part of the problem. But what I think you want to do is build a system where they do have value, and part of their value is that they can be built into something larger, or they can be a stepping stone to another credential. And I think that's part of why it's taking probably longer than it should have to really land on this. I have to say the Ontario government is very, very interested in this topic of micro-credentials and wants, I think, something, we're all looking for good things to come out of this experience. And one of the good things I think they want to come out of this experience is something more kind of regularized and routinized about micro-credentials, rather than just anybody setting one up and saying, here, come get a micro-credential on coding, right?
Right. What's
that
the
was
standardization? Yeah. So how do we look across? And to me, micro-credentials has always been about modular learning and about personalized learning, so looking at an individual and having the individual be able to self-reflect and say, okay, so here's the technical skills I want. Like, here's what I'm passionate about, what I want to pursue. Here's the technical skills I need. Here's the ones that I already have, and being able to be recognized for that. Then here's the soft skills that I need to develop. And, I know that I'm going to need to be a great communicator. I need to be able to collaborate productively, all of those things. And then being able to say, where are my gaps? And then being able to take bite-sized educational opportunities that are going to help me really focus in and zone on my areas of development. Right. And I think that that's, to me, the next step in that personalized learning journey is really allowing me to, into your point of that lifelong learner piece, allowing me to choose at given moments where I need to sort of up my game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. And part of our challenge is that, we're still kind of funded in that, I mean, all of education is in a very kind of old-fashioned hours, in a classroom, literally, kind of thinking. And so, and we don't have an effective way of giving people true credit for what they're already competent in. And as you know, because I know you do a lot of work in this space and are a great thinker in this space, we don't give them credit for the competencies they already have. I don't know if we shouldn't take a leaf from I think of, internationally trained professionals who come to Canada, and basically there's this kind of match against, well, here's the Canadian licensing requirements. Here's yours from your home country. Oh, you just need these 3 things. And if we get through those 3 things, we'll give you, those kinds of approaches, rather than saying, oh no, sorry, you got to start again. No, that was very interesting, but you got to start again. And of course, there are still professions that are in that frame of mind. But yeah, we do have to evolve to that, and it's very sort of disruptive to think about it. But I think it's, particularly when we're thinking about adult learners and people in their later stages of their career, they're moving.
Yeah, well, and you know, what you just said about international students and coming over and things like that. I mean, it's so frustrating to see people who have had illustrious careers in different places around the world and have them come, and we have a need for that skill set, and surely they've been, you know, gone through the immigration process with the intention that we need those skills, and then we make it impossible for them to fulfill, which I think is its own issue that we need to rectify quickly. But you're right, this idea of how do you recognize the work that people are doing and the skills that they're developing. And if we're rewarding things like those competencies around creativity and collaboration, how might employers start to be able to sort of almost add to that portfolio for that student as well, right? You're almost, every person has their own portfolio, you know, that's personalized to their skills and both soft and competencies that are technical, and being able to continuously add to that and be recognized for that in a standardized way so that employers know, when I hire Quinn, I know that I'm getting someone who's resourceful, and I know that he's a great communicator, and I see that, you know, he's been really working on his collaboration. Like, to me, what we provide right now in terms of a resume doesn't really align with what we're looking for, which is kind of crazy, right?
Well, you know, it's interesting you bring employers in, and of course, I mean, part of what we're kind of wired for is to, you know, focus on our graduates moving from, you know, the convocation stage into the workplace, as I put it. But let's look at the kind of the other end of that spectrum and say, well, how could you bring the K-12 system into that into that approach? I mean, who are working on competency-based, I understand that. So it's
Except I'll tell you, I mean, we know the biggest barrier are marks, right? We know K-12 is, in my mind, is this great momentum, at least let's say pre-COVID. I'm sure we'll regain the momentum, but pre-COVID, there was exceptional momentum in systems around the world, K-12, around adopting those competencies, right? And really driving competency-based education in a personalized way. But at the end of the day, that's really a lot easier K-8, to be honest, than it is in high school, because in high school is saying, boy, we need to, you know, get our folks ready for higher education. And what higher education is signaling is marks matter. I mean, the entrance averages to some of these programs, I mean, I doubt that I would get into anything in this year. Like, it's wild to me. And so we can't be saying we need to be driving holistic, you know, portfolios for each person, and we want to look at things holistically, but then have that be the barrier, right? And in terms of admissions. Yeah,
I mean, it's a challenging subject because it really takes us right back to, you know, you got to strip away. It's almost like and we don't do blank slates well when we've got, you know, well-established bricks and mortar institutions and all those kinds of things. I mean, we discovered that, you know, you discover that in a pandemic. But it does, we do need to do that kind of thinking that says, okay, so how can we drive that, and how can we post-secondary connect better to the K-12 system, and particularly on that score. I mean, we have some disconnects already that we're working on, but there's a kind of a clear space where we could actually make a new connection.
Totally. So I'm going to actually switch over to questions here, David, and let the audience ask some questions. There's quite a few coming through. Thank you to everyone who is already submitted. If you'd like to submit a question, please just go through to the chat and grab the form, and you can enter it there. This is a really important question, and one I'm really thrilled that someone's asked. I mean, I think one of the most important dialogues happening in this moment is very clearly around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think you and I have both seen just horrendous tragedies over the past, well, sadly 400 years, with the ongoing murder of Black people. We've had, I think, great conversations started in the mainstream around systemic racism. We know that there's an onus on all of us in a position of privilege to listen, to learn, and to engage really in positive action. So the question is, what role does higher education play in leveling the playing field? And what is Seneca doing specifically to lend support to people of color?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, I mean, I enter that kind of discussion, you know, with a great sense of humility and both kind of institutionally and personally. So, you know, let me speak more generically about higher education and more specifically about Seneca. I mean, one of the things I learned when you mentioned I was CEO at UNICEF, one of the things I learned very quickly in the international development world was once you kind of got the vaccines and the clean water and sewage down, it was all about education. You know, that's how you create opportunity for people, is through education. And of course, in this world of ours here, and virtually everywhere else now in the world, higher education has become, you know, the absolute kind of table stakes to achieve that opportunity and to. So, I mean, I think again, on behalf of the college system, I mean, we're proud that we do have a active sort of access mandate. I mean, that's part of why we exist, and we draw very equally from all sort of areas of socioeconomic bands in the province of Ontario. So we've been able to give people that opportunity, and of course, the events recently, not just in the United States, but in Canada, indicate that we've got a long way to go in terms of systemic racism and discrimination, yes, against Black people, against Indigenous communities and individuals. Just the other day, you know, a statistic came out about the racism felt by Chinese Canadians. Of course, you know, Canada's got, there's anti-Semitism rears its ugly head. Let's take it out of religion and race. People with disabilities face significant. So it's about racism, it's about discrimination. So I referenced the project that we're undertaking to renew Seneca, and we had a town hall for all of our employees and some emails. I've asked our employees, partly because I hear the fatigue about consultation and set up another committee, and you know, we want action. I've asked them to give us their best thinking on actual things that we can do. Yes, we may create some structures out of it, some, you know, ongoing structures out of it, but because I know that, you know, when I talk to senior members of the community, of the Black community, people of color, there is a lot of committee fatigue. Don't ask me to be on another committee, and then, you know, when the dust settles, the committee will give its report, and then we see nothing happens. So I think we're at the point now, and I mean, I think it's remarkable how people are, you know, opinions have changed. There's a seismic shift, I think, in people are ready for action. People are ready and demanding action. And I think that's, you know, if anything good could come out of something that's very terrible, that's the good.
Totally. Well, and I think, you know, what we've heard in our conversations also internally is that, you know, representation matters. And how are we making sure as leaders of organizations that we're hiring, you know, diverse faculty and diverse service providers, and making sure that, you know, we're really taking advantage of the incredibly, you know, talented and diverse talent pool that we have available. So when we go into some of these questions, I'm trying to group them into themes here. There's two big topics that are emerging here. One is actually asking about faculty, and you know, how are we ensuring that faculty are the best of the best from their field? So someone, Narinder, thank you for this question, the way that it is was structured. But you know, we want to see professors who have actually come and are experts in their field. And so what is Seneca doing to make sure that we continue to have world-class faculty? And what are we doing to make sure that we're keeping them up, in another question, in sort of abreast of that, you know, digital technology and how best to use technology?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And of course, in a sense, we put an extra burden on ourselves by saying, not only do we want you to be, you know, kind of a subject matter expert from the sense of the theory of the topic, but we also want you to have the practical experience. You know, one of the, we are closing in on 20 honors baccalaureate degrees. And one of the requirements of having a degree is that you have to have a substantial proportion of your faculty with a terminal degree in the subject. And we said, that's fine, a PhD is fine, but we also want you to have industry experience, because that's what you're also going to share with the students. So, I mean, that's in the hiring practice. It's also in the staffing practice, because, you know, you mentioned the graduate certificates that attract so many of those universities. I mean, I freely admit, because I think it's a strength, that a good portion of the teaching in some of those credentials is done by part-timers, not part-timers who are going from school to teach, but part-timers who are coming up from their office, from their studio, from their workplace, from wherever they are, coming and giving us 3 hours to teach, and then going back and doing this stuff. So those students are experiencing, when they're talking about a challenge, someone sharing one that they dealt with that morning in their workplace. So it's very fresh, very real. The teaching and learning department does a lot of work with faculty and how to keep current and how best. I mean, our PD program for faculty that allows them to continue to stay current in their field. A lot of, as I say, we do have faculty who are part-time, who are actually coming from the field and then going back to the field. I always reference, we in one of our marketing programs, we had the vice president of customer experience for the Blue Jays. Not bad. A pretty good teacher to share with you some world's class marketing experience. So it's a combination of strategies, but at the end of the day, we know that connection has to be very strong, because again, we're looking at what happens to our graduates afterwards, and the satisfaction of our employers, and the fit that they see that's coming out of that, because they had the familiarity with the field already.
Well, I love that you're focused on hiring real world practitioners, because what scares me is when we do have people who are teaching subjects and things that they don't have real world experience. I mean, and if you as a student, and if you're trying to be the best basketball player, do you want to learn from, I was going to say Michael Jordan, but that's dating me, isn't it? Is LeBron James still playing? Insert your appropriate analogy here. That's age appropriate. But I want to learn from a pro basketball player, not someone who read a manual and understands technically all of the various aspects, right? You want to learn from somebody who's actually been in the field. And to your point, when you've actually been, I mean, theory is so much different than practice. And when you get into practice, you start to see the gaps and opportunities where the textbook ends, right? And I think that is one of the distinguishers from Seneca from so many other people, is that you have placed such a emphasis on having real world practitioners and people who are current, not people who have retired and are doing this afterwards, but are actually doing it in this moment, which is amazing.
Well, and every one of our programs has a program advisory committee that's made up of people who are actively working in the field that program is actually supporting. So they're coming in as well, basically saying, not just, here's some guidance on curriculum and so on, but also this is what we're looking for. They're often employers of our graduates and employers of our students in those co-op and those internship type opportunities. So that's really, fresh off the street kind of intelligence, which is tremendously helpful to us.
Which means then the gap that you need to be addressing internally is, I think about someone like myself coming in to teach or something, right? You need to be taught how to teach, right? It's not enough to just know your industry and know the ins and outs of how to do your job with a world-class ability. You now also need to learn how to engage other people in learning and what questions to ask at what times, right? So it's great that you have that teaching and learning to be able to really help drive good pedagogy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there is that great irony that especially given what you have to go through these days to be a K-12 teacher, and then at the post-secondary level, there's no equivalent, and it's certainly not good enough to remember the good old days. So yeah, no, we do have a very serious course for all of our new faculty, and it's terrific. On the digital side, I mean, this has been, it's kind of, I don't know whether it's a sort of a Star Trek warp speed or the time machine, but we've just been fast forwarded through a whole bunch of learning at every level, including for faculty, in terms of not just put your PowerPoints up, but to actually make a truly engaging, interactive experience for students. And of course, there are different kinds. There's synchronous, there's asynchronous, and again, I think, part of that is going to be determined by subject and so on. And what's really interesting is the incredible creativity of the faculty in thinking about how, just the other day, one of the faculty came into the campus to go into the lab to do some filming all by himself, so perfectly safe. But rather than have all the students come in, right? So they're thinking, and there's, of course, we're making investments in VR, and there's tools available that can supplement that on-campus experience that are actually really good and getting better and better and better.
Yeah, I think it's only going to improve, and being able to do those simulations for that experiential piece is really key. We have time for one last question, David, and the question that I see coming through is there's lots of questions around career pathways, and what is Seneca doing to help support students in gaining employment and building their own viable career paths?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. Of course, we talked about already the work integrated learning experiences that, whether depending on the program, whether it's a placement, whether it's a co-op, and so on, all very valuable because you can put it on your resume, if nothing else, and say, I've actually worked in the field, and I understand, what a workplace is, whatever that workplace happens to be in the program. But we have a very robust career development group as well that works not just after you graduate, but very much before you graduate, that prepares you for that, whether it's everything from, resume building to, we've got in fact, a Seneca Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center incubated venture that helps students practice through VR interviews. It's absolutely fabulous. It's called InStage. And our career folks are using that as well to help students actually practice an interview with a panel. It gives you feedback on eye contact. It gives you feedback on how many ums you had in your, and so on and so forth. I know it's frightening. I won't do it. So, and again, we have a robust employer community around Seneca that really helps us as well with job postings, job fairs in the good old days on campus, now virtually. We've done them virtually. We did them virtually in April. So a whole bunch of ways that we're trying to help our students.
Well, and the lab that you have created, the Entrepreneurship Center itself, is actually a career development opportunity for students. And one of the most staggering stats that we marvel over at Future Design School, and is the focus of a lot of the work that we do, is really around the fact that something crazy like 51% of the population is forecasted to be self-employed by something like 2030 or something in the next 10 years. And so, and you can only imagine how much that's been accelerated by things like high unemployment through COVID and all of those things. And so, thinking about how students equip themselves with the skills and confidence to be entrepreneurial, to be able to be a freelancer, to be able to go out and seek new business opportunities is probably first and foremost in terms of skill development in this moment.
No, again, it's much more widespread, but I give some of our most creative programs where you wouldn't necessarily expect to see the business side huge credit, because they realized very early on, you're not going to be discovered by Sony Records and signed up. You're going to be your own marketing. You're going to be your own producer. You're going to, whole careers that are basically getting you ready to set up your own business. Well, it's as much about the craft as it is the business. And so that's a very important side. And we're seeing that in more and more areas, to your point about how many people are going to be basically self-employed or lifelong contractors. Yeah.
No, it's a brave new world we're heading into. Well, I can't believe we've reached the end of the segment already. I want to thank everyone who joined us today, and especially thank our amazing and insightful guest. Hope everyone has a very safe and healthy summer. Thanks for joining us.